Today, we're tackling a troubling yet all too familiar story coming out of one of Texas's large megachurches, Gateway Church. In just 2 months, four of its leaders, including executive pastor Kemntal Glasgow, have been forced to step down over various moral failings. This shocking involves the church's former senior pastor, Robert Morris, who resigned after admitting to a relationship with a 12-year-old girl when he was 21. As more allegations surface, we're left questioning the culture of secrecy and power within these institutions. How does a community meant to be built on trust and moral integrity repeatedly fail to protect its most vulnerable members? Let's dig into this and examine the implications from a skeptical humanist perspective. This story is from USA Today by Jonathan Limehouse from August 22nd, 2024. So I'm coming to you first, Mr. Dickey. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Cynthia.
Yeah, despite the story, but
Right.
I'm curious if you could just kind of expand on what does the pattern of leadership failures at Gateway Church suggest about the effectiveness of religious institutions in holding their leaders accountable?
Well, first of all, we hear stories like this all the time, and it's really and of course it's one of I think it's one of the staple types of arguments that we cover here on the nonprofits is the failure of religious leaders. And I think what makes it so interesting is not so much that there's human beings that are failing, it's that there are human beings that are supposed to be held up to the higher standard. They're supposed to be, the expectations are higher, the responsibility is higher, the level of trust certainly is higher than you would just, somebody walking in off the street, or even other professions that are normally trusted, like teachers and that kind of thing. People will trust their religious leaders, and I think it has something to do with the halo effect. Ironically, that is that when there's people in positions of authority or people that are particularly skilled in one particular area, very often others, onlookers, will that respect and that admiration and that deference will kind of spill over into other areas. And so here we have people that are religious leaders, they're church leaders, they're the ones performing the marriages, they're the ones leading the Sunday morning services, they're the ones that are taking attendance in the Sunday schools, they're the ones that are visiting the hospitals and so forth. And so there's this high level of trust there, and obviously somebody's being neglectful here. And I think it primarily falls on the shoulders of the parishioners. I think that if they, I think some skeptical eyes need to be kind of thrown into the mix here. To answer your question, they do a crappy job of policing this kind of thing, of living up to this already inflated standard, and it's really very frustrating. And for me personally, it's one of the most annoying things about religion that there is that unearned trust.
Yeah, I hear that. So let's go ahead and just build upon that. Jonathan, in what ways does the concept of restoration and healing, no, let's not do that. Let's do this. How might the church's response to moral failings reflect broader societal issues relating to power, secrecy, and the protection of vulnerable individuals?
Yeah, that's something that bothers me is these people, particularly at this church, they made a lot out of it that we care and love about these pastors, and we want to help them and pray for them and all that. What about the victim? It's like they fail at even attempting to listen to the victim. She spent 35 years complaining about this to the church leadership, and they did nothing about it. When finally she brought it out in public, that's when they decided that they had to do something about it. So it's obvious they don't care about this at all. So that's one of the things. But they can get away with that because they're a religious organization and they're supposed to be moral. And again, like he said, that's that. But they leave the victims of this in the dust, including their own parishioners. They're not doing them any services by hiding people who are committing crimes. Like Richard Morris is a pedophile. And he said that he has stopped doing it after abusing a young girl, 12 to 17 years old, for 5 years. Please, and his two of the people who were recently dismissed were his son, James, and his wife. Now, I'm not going to speculate on particularly why. They just said moral failings. That could be they knew about it and didn't do anything about it. That kind of gives me the idea that not the current guy, he could have had his own issues, but they also asked 3 members of the board of elders, their board of directors or board of trustees, depending on what kind of church you belong to, that were serving at the same time of the abuse. And they say they're not implicated in any wrongdoing yet. They said any wrongdoing, and that would be yet, because the investigation by this supposedly independent law firm, which I'm sure I have not had a chance to see what that law firm's ties to the church are. But this is where this is coming from. That law firm was the one who asked James Morris and his wife to take a leave of absence so that they could do the investigation without them there. So this is just really disgustingly weird. But the thing that bothers me the most is that in the broader society, we have a means of dealing with pedophiles and people who are enablers of pedophiles. It's called the law. Churches have always thought that they were above the law. And so they hide these things so that they shame their parishioners who have been abused, and they try and keep them from going public so they don't have to deal with the police or the FBI. And that's a societal issue, because we need to drop the pretense and realize that ministers, youth pastors and priests are all human beings. They have the same problems as the general population, and they need to be held accountable for their actions. They're not going to do anything to these people that is what should be done to them. Morris himself, the father, should be in jail.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. He should be in jail. He should be on a sexual predators list for the rest of his life. He should be in jail for at least 20 to 40 years. I'm saying now 60 to 80, and I think that the people in that church who knew about it should be in jail too, for at least as long as they didn't listen to the victim in this. That would be about 35 years. And it might be considered a little harsh, but for me, you let her suffer all those years and you didn't give her any solace whatsoever. You didn't pay for her therapy, none of that. And they should have. It was their person who was in power and had power over these people. And power dynamics are the best way for pedophiles and abusive people to be, because they get to do that largely without impunity, with impunity, and without the victims feeling like they can come forward and not be demonized for attacking the wonderful whatever it is. That's my words on that.
Yeah, I have to always reiterate, when you have behaviors like this, crimes of, forced sexual acts, abuse, violence, because all of those acts really are acts of violence. It's not about attraction. It's always about power. And to be able to control another individual or a group of individuals with that power and forcing them into silence, saying, this is our secret, this is between me, you, and kind of like what Color Purple said, you better not tell nobody but God, he'll kill your mama. But the thing is, is that the person that is experiencing the abuse is listening to them saying things like that, and they're not going to open their mouth, because of course they are concerned about, the person that's doing the abuse and what other things that they might do if they tell. And then to your point, Jonathan,
kill their mama.
Yeah, to tell their mom, right, exactly, their mom, their dad, whomever, happens to be a parental figure in their life. And it's very disgusting in my eyes that, this is a pervasive culture that actually has happened and continues to happen in church, no matter what denomination that it happens to be in. And instead of the people who are being victimized, they're not getting help because we as a society think that the church is able to police itself. And obviously that's not the case. So Cindy, I'm coming to you because, one of the things that you mentioned is is how it struck you, how people that were being interviewed in the article and pointed out how abusers behaved since the abuse. Can you expand on your thoughts a bit concerning that?
Yeah, I'm totally with you guys regarding the idea that this halo effect that exists, the idea that because they are parishioners or whatever, or leader of their churches, they are somehow better than the rest of us. They did nothing, and no religion did anything in the last 1500 years to deserve this difference. And I think that's something we need to voice very strongly, because this idea that they're better somehow, it still exists today. And after the thousands of cases and the hundreds of cases we've covered here on the non-profits, this idea is still very much pregnant. So yeah, this reaction that we saw in the article from all the people that were interviewed, it was, yeah, but he did a bad thing, but now he's a good person. He's helping the church, he's guiding us, and blah blah blah. And that stems from the idea that we see a lot in Christianity, actually, that each wrong has to be some kind of balanced with a certain amount of good actions. We see that very, very often in movies and TV shows, especially American ones. But that's not how it works. You need to pay for your crimes through the human justice system, and not pretend that the supposedly good you did so far somehow nullifies the harm you caused. Because as you pointed out, the victim here, she never got any, I don't like the word compensation because we think about money, but any recognition that she is a victim. And everything that it says that, he behaved since that, it sounds like they're just saying, yeah, he did a bad thing. Yeah, it's almost as if they are saying, yeah, the devil made him do it, but he's actually a good person, So yeah, this idea that this act is not deserving of, it's not an act because it lasts for 5 years, if I remember correctly. So this horrendous situation shouldn't exist, and it shouldn't be pushed over by some supposedly good actions that the perpetrator did. Because what also infuriates me is that when you look at the political climate in the US right now, one of the right's main arguments is that the left is full of rapists and all that kind of stuff. And what we see is that actually the rapists are on their side, and they act almighty and all pure. And in reality, they're just the worst people, and they try to hide it and they try to avoid any consequence. And that just kills me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you when you say that, and I know that we kind of touched a bit about the restoration healing versus actually holding these people who commit these acts to justice and accountability, and not necessarily seeing that after so many cases, as you pointed out, Cindy, that we've covered just on the nonprofits alone, about constantly hearing about church leaders who happen to engage in moral failings and have to step down, but the only thing that is their account that they're actually receiving is just a you got caught, so you need to go ahead and get in the corner and go on timeout, and that's unfortunate. And I think that we should really talk more about where do we go from here, because we are constantly talking about how there is no oversight, there is no checks and balances, there is, even though you may have a governing body over these church leaders, they're still going to only be more inclined to protect the church and the church's name rather than actually protecting the constituents that have been abused or the parishioners that have been abused. So So how can we critically assess? Because I do recognize that we may have a little bit of a bias here, guys. I don't know if you know that, but how can we critically assess the role of religious organizations in addressing or failing to address the allegations of abuse and misconduct amongst their leaderships? Jonathan, I would like for you to start, and then Scott, and then Cindy.
Okay. One thing that I just want to say is when I was in the Navy, we had a saying, one aw shit wipes out a world of attaboys. So, that was how they worked. I think that one way we can start getting ahead of this is to, I think, get the churches to post who they can call if they're having problems like that, and let the law enforcement take the actions they need to take. And they should be looking at not just the offender, but the enablers as co-conspirators in this crime. And, they are either post facto or during the crime, they are enabling it and they're not reporting it. So there should be a penalty for them too. And if that wipes out your entire church leadership, maybe your church doesn't need to exist. That, and I'm totally aware of my biases in this situation. I have many of them, but, I won't go into them, but, so for that, I would just say, let's let the laws we have and maybe change a few to make sure that churches cannot hide this kind of behavior anymore. I guess it's Scott.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Sure. Yeah. Cynthia, you mentioned a couple of words there, justice and accountability. I think those are key. And Cindy and Jonathan were both talking about legal issues as well. The thing is, yeah, we're biased. That's probably one of the reasons we chose this story. But what we're asking, what we're saying is needed here. And if you listen to what we're saying, we're just asking for the same justice and accountability that everybody is expected to take a part in. And there was a quote in the article that just really, really pissed me off. The quote goes, "In June, Gateway senior pastor Robert Morris resigned after admitting to having, quote, inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady 35 years ago. The young lady in question had been 12 and Morris was 21 and married." Okay, so let's get our terms straight here. We're not talking, technically inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady is technically true, but that's not the whole truth, okay? He raped a child, okay? This is statutory rape, and that's what we're talking about here. And so the accountability that we're asking for is the same accountability that any organization would be expected to be a party to. And the same justice is going to be the same that we would expect of anybody, whether they be a minister, a teacher, or whatever. Okay. And that's all we're asking for. If they commit a crime, they hurt a child, they deserve to be judged by a jury of their peer, just like anybody else. And that's all we're asking for is just, come on, people, let's just hold up the same standards that everybody has to live with. That's what we're saying.
Come on, guys. Come on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Cindy, what say you?
Yeah, on top of everything we're talking about right now, I'd just like to point out that when you go through something like that, you cannot heal until you are really recognized as a victim. So it means that on top of what she went through, which is already horrible, she had to fight for 30 years to be acknowledged as a victim. And so all this time she could not heal. And so on top of the harm that she went through during those 5 years, they added insult to injury during those 30 years. And I think we need to take that into account. Regarding the legal aspect of this, I think it starts with political will. I seem to remember that 2 or 3 years ago, we did a show on the non-profits about a situation like this in France, because someone said that God's law was above man's law, something like that. And the way you start fighting this is by removing the exemption for confession, because in many countries and probably in many states in the US, confession has the same level of secrecy than doctor-patient secrecy or lawyer-client, and that shouldn't exist because it comes from the idea that the pastor or the father or whatever has some moral authority, and they don't. So remove this authority by saying that if you are a victim or if you know about something, you have zero legal protection if you don't say it. And starting with this would change slowly mentalities in these regards.
They're complicit.
Yeah.
Cindy, I'm so glad you brought up the victim's perspective there. I mean, that was something that it's easy to point fingers at the person doing the crime, but we need to remember that there's victim there, and they need to be addressed, and their needs need to be addressed, and their long-term, decades-long pain has to be at the very least addressed, so that they can, like you were saying, Cindy, so that they can begin the healing process.
Yeah, it's always important to recognize those things in order for the person who has been victimized to get the necessary healing, and also recognition. And to be honest with you guys, I don't necessarily mind compensation but I understand it's not just about money. But when you're thinking about lifetime of therapy, when you're thinking about even the possibility of that person being interrupted in their development and not being able to do things like hold a job, purchase a home, even be able to have their own families because they are so traumatized by what has happened to them, I don't necessarily think that taking care of them in that particular aspect is not a bad idea. But
it's a small thing, but it's better than nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
It's a start.
It is a start. Well, churches are supposed to be, they're supposed to be places that are serving as moral guides, but too often lack the necessary oversight to prevent abuses of power. Expressing regret after the fact isn't enough. There needs to be immediate and transparent consequences to protect the vulnerable, to possibly restore trust. The failure to address these issues promptly and effectively damages not only the congregation, but the wider faith community. It's past time for churches to implement real checks and balances and invite independent oversight to ensure leaders are held to the highest standards they supposedly preach. Unfortunately, integrity of the faith has faltered, and goalposts moved to focus on drag time story hour instead of their own moral failings of abuse and scandal being on display. But if you, dear viewer, want to hear more of us and see us on display, click here.